A player flips their commitment away from the Nittany Lions, and now Penn State and James Franklin might be forced to do something that they haven't done in this new era of college football.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for Penn State sports. My name is Seyko, and I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. We are talking about the ripple effect from Peyton Falzone's decommitment. Quarterback commit now with the Auburn Tigers, and what it means for Penn State and why they are going to have to do something that they have never done in this new era of college football, and just talk about the impact overall and how it affects the quarterback battle that is going to be ensuing between Jaxon, Smolik, and Ethan Grunkemeyer. Does it create a quarterback dilemma here for Penn State now that Falzone is out of the picture? And I do want to begin with that element where Penn State is going to now have to do something that they've never done. James Franklin hasn't had to do this before, and that is potentially going to the transfer portal for quarterback depth. There's no shame in that necessarily, but Penn State, for the entirety of this transfer portal and NIL era, has been able to rely on recruiting and developing high school quarterbacks. From Drew Aller, Bo Prabula did ultimately leave Penn State, but it never forced Penn State into a position where they couldn't overcome this. Drew Aller, Bo Prabula, now Jaxon, Smolik, Ethan Grunkemeyer in the fold, Beckham Kritza, and with Troy Huhn still committed, but Peyton Falzone was, and this could have been the same case had Troy Huhn been the one to decommit. And things get really crazy if they do lose Troy Huhn's commitment. So Penn State is going to have to keep their focus there. But you're going to have to go to the transfer portal, I think, if you're Penn State. Because you could debate if Penn State actually needed two quarterbacks in this class of 2026. I think it benefited them to have both Huhn and Falzone in this 2026 class. Now, fortunately, they still have Troy Huhn, but the future after Drew Aller gets a little more complicated. And why I say that is because Ethan Grunkemeyer or Jaxon, Smolik, whichever QB loses that battle, that's going to happen this offseason. Aller's going to go off to the NFL. And then you have Grunkemeyer and Smolik batting for one QB job. QB1. They're not going to have a two quarterback system there. And then the loser of that is going to be in the transfer portal, meaning that Penn State's going to be without any reliable backup at that point in time. Now, I guess if you want to look for some saving grace, maybe Beckham Kritza is ahead of his developmental schedule. I think he is going to need some more time. Even second year within the program, is Penn State competent enough to make him QB2? Is Troy Huhn that good right out of the gate? He enrolls early, goes through spring football. Is he going to be ready as a true freshman to go in at a moment's notice to be QB2? Because he's going to back up whoever wins Grunkemeyer versus Smolik. We're going to talk about that QB battle later in the show, because it's not a guarantee that Ethan Grunkemeyer necessarily wins. Jaxon, Smolik very well might win the backup QB job this time around, but this is going to be a multiple part quarterback battle. And now Falzone's decommitment kind of complicates that a little more. I'm not against the idea of Penn State going into the transfer portal to get another quarterback. Do you know that there is a quarterback that is able and willing to join Penn State and willing to either go into a battle with the winner? I don't think Penn State's going to do that. I don't think Penn State's going to have a multi-layered QB battle with the eventual winner of Smolik and Grunkemeyer. I think that ultimately alienates the guy that you've been recruiting for quite some time. So you're going to have to recruit somebody to be QB2 or QB3, however you want to look at it. And is there somebody that's going to be willing to do that? To say that I want to be a backup? In theory, you could find somebody like that. Ohio State's done it. Michigan's done that. A veteran that's at the tail end of their college career. They could add some knowledge and wisdom to the room for playing tons of college football, but that's not a guarantee. You know what you're getting through high school football recruitment. You have that relationship, you have that chemistry, and that's what was lost with Falzone. More than just that. I mean, Falzone is an extremely intriguing prospect. So this is the domino effect that's been created here, is that your depth chart is either Smolik or Grunkemeyer. If Penn State can somehow pull that off, where they're able to keep the loser of that QB battle within the room, okay, then this conversation is null and void, and this episode doesn't have as much purpose in the future. But in this era, that's not going to be the case. And we saw Penn State, to an extent, push Bo Pribula into the transfer portal, knowing that he wasn't going to start at Penn State, or he could have for one season. But I think James Franklin and Penn State at least have morals when it comes to that. James Franklin has gone on the record that they do what is best for the player. And what is best for Smolik or Grunkemeyer, depending on what happens, is not to have them ride the bench at Penn State. So it might be good for the program, but it's not going to be good for them because they could start somewhere else. Those are Power 4 quarterbacks. Both of them. They could start at another place that's not Penn State. Falzone just gave you that insurance and also gave you a wild card of somebody down the road that could eventually be a superstar with the right kind of training, the right kind of development. And you lose all of that within one player. I get it. Some people say, oh, well, Zach, he was going to be a tight end anyway, or he was never going to be a quarterback to begin with. Hey, that's your opinion. And you could be correct at the end of the day. But Penn State was recruiting him as a quarterback. So actions speak louder than words. They were going to have him in the QB room. Whether that worked out or not, you still had a backup plan. You still had an extension of the QB depth chart after Drew Aller moves on to the NFL. So you just lose another piece of the puzzle that would have made this transition post-Aller a little easier for the Nittany Lions, because they're not going to get a second QB in this class of 2026. That's not on the table anymore. That's not an option. There is not, maybe a quarterback prospect emerges down the road. I always want to preface that there's a 5% chance that that could happen, that somebody does emerge like a Bo Pribula was as a 3-star quarterback. We can take him, we can develop him, and he can be, knowing that he's the second QB in this class. But I don't think that's ever going to happen again in this era of college football. I always thought it was going to be difficult to maintain two of them, and then ultimately, this is what happened. Hune, I thought, was going to be the player that ended up decommitting or flipping because he's from the state of California, but he's locked in. He is Penn State's QB in this class of 2026. He is a very talented prospect. He's already solid as a passer, as a quarterback, as a signal caller. He can definitely get better, of course. He's not finished developing, but Penn State does have a reliable quarterback for the future. It makes 2027 more important, but that's what Penn State's going to have to do if they don't like where they stand with Smolik or Grunkemeyer, Kritza, and Hune, which I don't blame them if they do. They're going to have to go to the transfer portal and hope for the best in that situation with what you're getting. Well, let's continue to break it down, because I mentioned a QB battle that's ensuing. Who's going to win? Ethan Grunkemeyer or Jaxon Smolik? Because it's not a guarantee that Ethan Grunkemeyer does win that job. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. Now, are you new to FanDuel? Because if you are, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. All you have to do is go to the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com and you can get started with that. FanDuel is great because you can track all of your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. And you can use these bonus bets on any sport. Baseball, soccer, golf, as I've mentioned. WNBA is going on. Penn State win totals. That's right. You can bet on Penn State in the offseason. Do you think Penn State's going to have more or less than 10.5 wins? If you like those lines, you can go over to FanDuel and make those wagers today. And remember, if you are new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ethan Grunkemeyer versus Jaxon Smolik. This is going to be a multi-part QB battle because the winner of QB2 for this season could be very different from the battle that's going to be waged for QB1 when the stakes are higher. Most people are going to assume that Ethan Grunkemeyer is going to win this one. He should be the favorite. He should be the favorite because he enters in with the better pedigree. 4-star quarterback, consensus, top 10 quarterback in the entire nation coming out of high school. He's also part of the same pipeline that, well, Falzone's no longer a part of, but Brad Mandler, who's the personal QB quarterbacks coach for Drew Aller and then Ethan Grunkemeyer, and then he was working with Falzone, and he's also working with Troy Hune too. So that pipeline still continues. So that's why Grunkemeyer is viewed as the heir apparent to the Penn State starting quarterback job. Grunkemeyer has effortless arm strength, good accuracy. I think the inexperience eventually needs to catch up. So where Penn State really needs where a QB really needs to be good at the college level is being able to read defenses, decision-making, that kind of thing. And you're only going to get that through experience. So I don't question Grunkemeyer's raw ability, just decision-making, understanding the game, X's and O's. I do think he's a smart, cerebral player, but he still needs to be able to show it at this level. Jaxon Smolik is not as much of a wild card as people should think. This QB2 battle is close. And if I had to pick a winner right now and make a prediction here at the beginning of July, I would say that it would not be wrong. I don't think I'd be incorrect to say that Jaxon Smolik wins QB2 and then Ethan Grunkemeyer overtakes him for QB1. That is a very distinct possibility. And why I say that is because Smolik has overcome this leg injury a lot quicker than maybe people anticipated. Smolik should not be forgotten about. Everything that you think Ethan Grunkemeyer can do, Smolik can do just as well. There might be some subtle nuances and stuff. Okay, Ethan Grunkemeyer might have better short to medium accuracy, for example, but Smolik might have better deep throw accuracy, deep pass accuracy. I got to imagine because of the year of eligibility that Smolik has, that he is the smarter player. And it's not to say that, oh, Grunkemeyer is dumb or anything like that, but it's that Smolik does have that year of eligibility. Just when you were going through that injury, I imagine that he was spending a lot of time in the film room, kind of breaking down those subtle nuances. So Smolik and Grunkemeyer are very similar QB prospects. And Penn State's depth chart is in a great spot for this upcoming season because you have 2 QB2s behind Drew Aller. So if it were really to get in an awful situation, which I don't really want to speak into existence, but I won't frame it that way. Let me just say that Penn State has a lot of insurance on the quarterback depth chart with Aller, Grunkemeyer, and Smolik. And that all goes away because you could potentially lose 2 out of the 3 going into the 2026 season. But Smolik is mobile. He moves very well. Smaller quarterback, and so is Grunkemeyer for what it's worth. They're not Drew Aller, 6'5", 240 pounds, give or take, right? They're about 6'1", 6'2", 215, 220. But They have dual threat capability, so they could run the read option, but they're still pocket passers first and foremost. These aren't guys that rely on their legs as the first option. They're looking to throw. And then if it's not there, then they can move outside of the pocket. They can extend plays, both of them. I don't think there's a lot that separates them right now. And that's why I look to Smolik's ability to read a defense, his decision-making. He showed a lot of confidence in that spring game, in the blue and white game. I thought his decision-making was better. I thought he saw the field a lot better. Grunkemeyer made good plays, made good throws, but that's why I say there's not a lot that separates them, because in that same breath, Smolik also made great plays and great throws. Smolik is ahead of Grunkemeyer right now at this point in time. Could things change going into fall camp as we approach August and this QB2 battle plays out? It is a preview of what is to come in spring camp for next season for the QB1 battle. But Grunkemeyer, because of the potential, because of the raw ability that he possesses, could very well overtake Smolik in due time. And that's what's going to be strange. Smolik's your QB2 for the 25 season, and then Grunkemeyer's your QB1 for the 26 season. It is very much a possibility, but I would not be shocked if Smolik ultimately wins both QB battles. If he ends up being QB2 and he ends up being QB1 in 2026. Now, what that means going forward, I got to imagine that the loser of that QB battle goes into the transfer portal, because it is not worth it for either of those players to be a backup at Penn State and waste that time. You have endless amounts of time in the NFL, and I don't want to dismiss it that way, but your career could be 1 year. It could be 10 plus, right? In college, you get 4 to 5 years typically. You don't want to waste that when your goal is to get to the NFL, when your goal is to develop, when your goal is to start. That's why Bo Pribula transferred and went to Missouri, because he needs an opportunity to start now with his window closing. Smolik's going to be almost out of eligibility, or halfway through his eligibility. Grunkemeyer is going to be halfway through his eligibility. One of them is going to transfer out. We'll see which one it is. My prediction at this point in time, based on what we've seen, Smolik's QB2. Grunkemeyer eventually overtakes him and wins that starting job going into 2026. But it would not shock me, because of how close they are, how similar they are in terms of skill sets, that if Jaxon Smolik's QB1 in 2026, it shouldn't shock anybody. Let's just say that. Now let's really bring it back to the present. Is Aller a Heisman candidate? The depth chart, I already talked about how it's in a really good standing despite losing Bo Pribula. So expectations for this 2025 season, that is coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Drew Aller is not a serious Heisman contender, but it's not for the reason that you think. I like Drew Aller. I like him a lot. I'm glad that he's Penn State's quarterback. I think he's the best quarterback in the Big Ten, and he's a top 3 quarterback going into this upcoming season. I mean, you could make the case for him. I think Cade Klubnik and Drew Aller are 1A and 1B for this upcoming season here with all the quarterbacks. And new names are going to emerge and all of that. But when we're talking about Heisman, and I look back, and it's easy for me to look like the Penn State homer and say, yes, Drew Aller is a Heisman contender, but I want to have a knowledgeable take on this too. Because while he has the talent to be a Heisman, he is not set up to be a Heisman contender this season. Penn State's going to rely heavily on the ground game. You didn't bring Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back on accident. They are going to take a lot of the workload. And there's still other running backs after them. Quentin Martin, Corey Smith. Cam Wallace, if he's healthy and comes back from injury, was RB3 last year. So there are plenty of talented players on the depth chart. After Singleton and Allen, you have this offensive line that is built to be able to ground and pound the football for the entirety of the season. You have the talent. You have the depth at two important position groups when being a run-first team. So Drew Aller is kind of a luxury at this point. You need him to be a reliable game manager. You don't need him to take over games. And when I look back at previous Heisman winners, Bryce Young and Joe Burrow, those guys that won the Heisman, Jaden Daniels most recently, were putting up, I mean, Jaden Daniels didn't have 4,000 passing yards, but I feel like if you're Drew Aller, you need at least 4,500 to maybe 5,000 passing yards. And I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening for this Penn State offense because they don't need to go through the air like that. They don't need to operate in that capacity. They're going to be winning a lot of football games too. And what that means is when they're leading, they're going to be running the football quite a bit. If Penn State had a workhorse running back, if it was Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen, they would be contending for the Heisman with the amount of volume they're going to get. So the reason, in short, why Drew Aller is not a serious Heisman contender this season is because of the volume. He's not going to be throwing as much. He's not going to be throwing for 400, 500 yards a game routinely. Penn State's defense is going to be top 10 again. And you're going to have the ground game to just be able to will your way to victory. You don't need to rely on Aller to get into all of these shootout type of scenarios where the scoreboard's going to be lit up and Penn State's going to have 55 points or 56 and the opponent's going to have 49. No, this isn't the LSU team that had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and all of those weapons in the passing game. Yes, Kyron Hudson and Trevor Pena and Devontae Ross are all upgrades at the wide receiver spot. However, obviously, do you see the names that I mentioned versus the names that Penn State has? Okay, they're not really comparable, even though they are reliable there. Aller not being a Heisman contender is okay. He's still going to be a quarterback that Penn State, he'll throw for about 3,000 yards. He'll probably rush for somewhere. And again, that rushing yards for quarterbacks is very difficult because when you get sacked, that goes against your rush total. So 500 yards for Aller might be realistic, but I might be completely wrong in saying that because if he gets sacked in a game a number of times and that yardage goes against him, it's going to look like, oh, well, he doesn't run the ball effectively at all. No, Drew Aller is actually a very capable dual threat quarterback, even though he's a pocket passer first, and he should be with the arm talent. I would expect Aller to have probably 3,500 yards from the regular season. I think that's fair to say. Penn State's offense is going to be a juggernaut. They're going to score a lot of points, but it's going to be done so mostly on the ground. And remember, this QB depth chart is in a good spot too. You want to get Jaxon Smolik those reps when you're up by a bunch. You want to try to get Ethan Grunkemeyer in there as well, since they both have their red shirts. So then there's no consequence from putting them into games. The experience is beneficial for them. And you might see that. You might see one game where they're up by a bunch, Smolik goes in, and then you'll see another game, Ethan Grunkemeyer is the first to go in because they know how valuable those in-game reps are. Since Penn State right now won't be able to identify who's going to be QB1 in 2026. It is a great problem to have for Penn State, but just know that for the time being, Penn State will not have a QB as a Heisman contender based on the way that the system is set up. And that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.